everyone, and welcome back to the channel where we are going to have a long overdue catch up with Property Tribe's partner for London lettings and sales. It's Benham and Reeves, and I'm joined by director Marc von Grundher. And Marc, we have actually got a lot of catching up to do because we haven't
Yeah.
spoken since the budget
No.
or, the Renters' Rights Bill since the
Uh,
election. So, just really to start off with, your thoughts on the Renters' Rights Bill.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to be back. We actually look. I think it's not everybody's cup of tea. What's happened? I think the premise behind it is very decent, right? It's to give vulnerable tenants, because let's be honest, the government is always worried about the most vulnerable person, and they look at vulnerable tenants actually in council accommodation and terrible landlords accommodation, and making sure they have decent homes and they can stay there long term, because that's where the way it's going. If people can't afford to buy, they need somewhere to rent, and they want long term like they have in Europe. And I think that's very decent. I think the devil has been in the detail, and they've had lots of input put from tenant bodies like Shelter, Agecon's. Shelter are the worst, if I'm honest. We used to be a big Shelter sponsor. I used to pay them a lot of money annually. We don't do it anymore because actually they are really painful for landlords and for agents. They have tenants' views at heart, but the point is they don't care about anything else. So I think we should have offered longer term tenants as fixed term for both parties, with maybe some exit, 6 months notice or something to exit, or if you lose your job, some way to exit. But they haven't done that. It's 2 months notice at any time, and we just have to be prepared for that. We find as a business, our average tenancy length is just under 3 years. Someone who's staying for just under 3 years, they don't care about 2 months notice. I find that most people tend to be decent tenants, and they want to stay. If they want to stay long term, why would a landlord not want that if they can get the rent that they're due? And if you're a really terrible landlord and you want to put the rent up double, then of course you shouldn't be able to do that. Really, it's not nice if you've got a tenant for 10, 15 years. I don't mean you shouldn't be able to do it because you don't own the property. Of course, it's your right to do whatever you like. But it's not very nice. It's inequitable. And actually, the only reason you're doubling the rent is to kick the tenant out. So you should just come up and be fair and say, I want the tenant to leave. And why do you want them to leave? Well, if you're going to refurbish it, or you're going to move back in yourself, or you're going to sell it, then for those three reasons, you can still get the tenant out. How easy it will be, how long it will take in the courts, I don't know. I imagine to start with, it's going to be a whole headache. But over time, they will improve the system. I think they should have housing tribunals, which has somebody legally trained on it, an agent like myself, and someone else, I don't know, from Citizens Advice or something like that. I think that's what it should be. And those people should be making decisions around rental increases, around evictions, around all of that. If they did that like they have in Australia and other parts of the world, it'd be really good. I think rent increase, again, once a year, you're going to be able to say to the tenant, the market's gone up by 7%. I want to put my rent up by 7%. Again, that's quite fair. The reason I want 15, and if you want to put it up by 15%, you can do that, but you have to have a reason why. And it's not just because my flat's the nicest. It has to be, well, look, the tenant moved out. I spent 50,000, 20,000 pounds refurbishing. I decorate, I put new floor down, I put new furniture. So I need the rent to go up. That will be allowable, but you won't be able to just double the rent. And it's around being reasonable here. So yes, there are going to be those awful tenants, but we have them now, and they're a nightmare to deal with anyway, who's going to come along and rent something. They're going to move in, and after a couple of months, they're going to give notice and move out. So you end up with short-term lettings. I don't know how they will stop that when it's banned in buildings to do tenancies under 6 months or under a year, and you have a tenant move in and then on day 2 they give notice and actually leave after 2 months. How they'll stop that, I don't know. I imagine the law will supersede the leases, so that means you can end up with lots of short-term people. But where I'm saying is the law has come in, the Conservatives, so wherever your political allegiance is, remember the Conservatives started this. They didn't even push it through. They left Labour to push it through. So wherever you stand politically, it is what it is. And my view, you have to accept it, and you just have to be prepared. And as I said, we as a business, our average length is just under 3 years. I don't see much difference for us. But it's wait and see. But you must, people that get frightened of these things, knee-jerk reaction is to sell and not be in the market. That's silly because we've had so many changes over the years, capital gains tax, inheritance tax, all of these taxes that are there, as well as stamp duty changes and all of this. So actually, let's be honest, watch this space when it comes in. But for me, it doesn't worry me. I'm a landlord and I'm an agent. So I'm not overly worried.
Okay, well that's good to hear your view, Mark, because you have both sides of the coin,
Yeah.
landlord and agent. And I think you're absolutely right. Our sector has experienced a great deal of change over the last 15 years or so. And in any area of life, if you try and push back against change, it doesn't generally work out very well for you. Change is actually
No,
very positive. It can be acceptance, it can be embracing it. And that's what we're encouraging the Property Tribes community to do through educational resources like this, for instance.
yeah.
But, you've had a very, very robust London rental scene this year. And I am speaking from experience because I rent one of my apartments it's in Islington, well, between Highbury and Islington and Holloway Road area. And you've looked after that for me for a number of years now, with exceptional service. And I'm not just saying that. And it came up for relet, and I think I had 47 applicants by mid-afternoon. And we actually had to shut the applicants off because there were just too many. And in the end, I had the choice of about 8 really well qualified tenants.
There you go.
And I talked them all through with Billy at the office that's dealing with it, and we both decided on a really great tenant. And I actually got to think about £50 more rent than I'd put it on at, which was £50 more than the previous tenant had been paying. So I'm just sort of thinking it's been very robust, and I'm hoping that it's going to stay that way. We've had the budget. Has that had any impact on the London rental scene that you can start to feel at this fairly early juncture?
No, honestly, I mean, it's really interesting. I'm really pleased we did a good job for you, and we do try quite hard. And I say that all the time. We try very hard. Actually, what's interesting, just quickly, just finishing on what Vanessa said about her flat. She said to me earlier she had got £50 above the asking price. Now, this is something in the renters reform bill, I keep calling it, but it's not that. But what I keep thinking is they are saying you will not be able to accept a rent above the asking price. How is that reasonable? I don't know. But what that means is when you are pricing your flat, you would want to price your flat a little bit higher so that you can take less. So if your flat is £1,000 a month, I would be suggesting marketing at 1,100 because it gives you flexibility to negotiate. And that's our advice to everybody. Take it or leave it. But what you won't be able to do is have 10 bids and someone say, I'll give you £50 a month more, because that won't be allowed. You'll just have to take the flat fee. And you can't even determine good tenants against the length of tenure, because of course that won't matter anymore. So the one side effect against tenants is going to be you end up with 5 offers, a couple of them housing benefit, or 4 of them are housing benefit, one of them is working. It's always going to go to the one that's working. So actually, they're stabbing themselves in the foot a bit, because in the past, you could look at the amount of rent, long term, but of course, there's going to be no long term tie-in. So that's actually, so sorry, that was my little thing on your flat, and ending the renters rent reform bill. But
Right. So yeah, I'll just jump in there, Mark, if you don't mind, because the other thing, just to finish off this little part of the conversation, is that I had 2 or 3 tenants offer rent in advance, 6 months in advance, 1 year in advance, which is obviously quite compelling offer. I didn't accept that as it happens for my own reasons, but that will also be outlawed by the Renters' Rights Bill. This has been confirmed by Housing Minister Matthew Pennycook this week, that there will not be rent in advance allowed when the Renters' Rights Bill comes into effect on the commencement date, as it's known, when it suddenly just appears in our sector. So again, that's an interesting change as well.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a problematic change because it's a problematic change for students who don't reference. I hazard a guess that you will be able to take payments up front if tenants aren't referenced, but I don't know. I don't know if that'll be changed. That's a big problem because that will put a lot of people off because obviously deposits are fixed on a lower amount. So I don't know. In terms of
But
the
Mark,
budget,
what about all your sorry to jump in again,
yeah,
but
go
just
on.
quickly, what about all your good quality tenants that want London property, but they're coming from the Far East and Asia?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
You know,
International
yeah,
students. At the
yeah.
moment, an international student was 6 or 12 months in advance. I had heard that they were going to continue to allow that in order to give landlords safety. Or why would a landlord take an international student if they want to pay monthly? So, I don't know if is the answer. If it does come in, it's going to be a big problem. It's going to
What
be a
about
big
a
problem.
CEO of a major company in Hong Kong that wants to come and, contract in London for 3 years for his
Big
company?
problem.
It's
It's a
going to
big
be.
problem. It is a problem. I don't know. Those are the little things that will get ironed out. Just like with pets, they're talking about, a bigger deposit for pets and pet insurance, because what we saw is this massive drop off in landlords that wanted pets. I don't want pets. I don't want children. Kind of things we get asked all the time. But anyway, so that's on the rental reform. But in terms of the budget, I actually think from a pure and simple property perspective, actually the budget was pretty vanilla in the end because
Mm.
I think what they did very cleverly is they threw so much mud against the wall. The press were all over it. It was going to be the end of the investment property market. It's going to be terrible, terrible, terrible. So when she stood up there and said she's increasing stamp duty by 2% and nothing else affecting the property market, nothing else, actually it wasn't so bad. And then people came off, and actually I came off an additional 2% stamp duty. It gets lost if you're expecting 4% annual growth. You've made that money back in 6 months. Remaining property is a 5, 10, 20-year investment. It's a tiny amount. I'm not saying it's a tiny amount in the scheme of if you're paying 8, 10, 15% stamp duty, but if you're already paying 6 or 8 or 13% stamp duty, pay an additional 2%, that 2% extra is not so much to worry about. I think it was good they didn't touch capital gains and convert it into income tax. They did it for equities. Inheritance tax wasn't affected. Passing down to children wasn't affected. So actually, if I look at capital gains, not only did she not touch that, but actually it's better off today. Capital gains tax is better off today from the change they went before because it's only 24% as opposed to 28%. So actually, we're better off as investors now, except that little extra 2% stamp. So my view is the budget was absolutely nothing, and I'm not worried at all about that because it didn't. And actually, we saw from a lot of our clients, people were actually sighed a relief and continued ahead purchasing. So actually, that was really good.
But in terms of the extra 2% stamp duty, that's going to sting a hell of a lot more in London and the southeast, where your average property price is
Yep,
600,
yep,
800,000,
yep.
compared
I
to up
know.
north, where you can buy a property for 75,
I know.
100,000.
Yeah,
So,
but it's all, but yeah, you're right. But at least it's a percentage, right? So
mm,
it's all relative. If you're spending buying a house in, up north for 75,000, as you say, and the extra stamp duty is, very little, relatively speaking, it's £1,500. But if you're buying property in London, it's £750,000, and additional stamp duty is, it's a lot more. But my view is that actually it's all relative to the value because your rent will be lower and your capital gains will be more. So I again don't see it so bad. I'm not saying it sounds like I'm in favor of tax increases and I'm in favor of the renters bill, but I'm not. I'm just saying it is what it is, and it's not as bad as a lot of people were putting out. And
mm,
I'm sitting where we do with a lot of clients who were very worried. Actually, we're not so worried now.
mm.
We didn't see anybody chip on exchange. We didn't see any of that. It was again, it's 2%. And you're right. Usually in these things, people have a go. We didn't actually see any. So it's okay, and I'm not displeased with where we got to. So it's all right. I mean, funny enough, just a little anecdote talking when you're talking about Rachel Reeves. Funny enough, I was in the House of Commons a couple of weeks ago, and I had dinner with Nigel Farage, who, whether you chalk and cheese, whether you like him or don't like him, he's a bit Marmite as a character. Actually, one of the things I asked him was, what does he think? What does he think the resolution to the housing market, the housing crisis that we have is, i.e., the lack of supply and population growth. They're estimating, Bloomberg are estimating 20 by 2030 we'll have 70 million people in the UK, and they're not, and that'll be an additional 4 million people, 3 million people or something. And and they're anticipating over a 5-year period to build 1.5 million homes with already a huge shortage. So that continuous shortage, and actually I asked him what does he think to do. He really wasn't very positive. He was very much against, we need to stop immigration because it's people coming in and immigration taking homes that other people have. I'm not sure that is the most the best way to resolve it. I think the best way to resolve it is to build more homes and have released not such restrictive planning. I also think my other advice is, and I said to him, and I would say again to Rachel Reeves, if I saw her, or anybody, Keir Starmer, really, because it should be Prime Minister, because housing is such an important fundamental right and need for people. They should be looking at the number of people, older people living in large houses who don't move, who should move. People that are in their 80s living in a 5-bedroom house. It doesn't matter where they are up and down the country. They don't need a 5-bedroom house. They could do with a 2-bedroom flat or a 3-bedroom flat or a 2-bedroom house or a 3-bedroom house. They should be downsizing, and they won't downsize because of the taxes. I think they should. Honestly, I think they're going to get hit. Their estate is going to get hit with inheritance tax in any event. So actually, I think they could do a deal for downsizers over a certain age, maybe over 70, over 75, whatever they did the winter warm allowance that they've removed now. They could take that age and say, if you downsize, your stamp duty will be reduced, or whatever it will be. You need to encourage people to move out of those homes so it frees them up. So either they can be turned into flats and more accommodation, or released for other families who need that extra space. I think that is a huge area that the government don't want to touch. And the Conservatives, especially, because they tend to be conservative voters. But I really feel these are important areas. I mean, my parents in their 80s live in a huge house. My mother-in-law lives in a huge house. Neither of them will move. And unless there was an incentive to move. And I think that's one thing that would help. I'm not saying it will release 1 million homes, but you'd be surprised how these things snowball. I think I really do. But yeah, I think there are lots of interesting things out there that they could do, but whether the government do it or not is something else.
Yeah, I think it's also about building the right type of homes, which is affordable
100%.
homes and social homes, but in the right places,
Yeah.
and ensuring that there's, sufficient infrastructure to serve all the extra people, so that you don't have, waiting lists for a doctor's surgery for, 8 weeks or something, and things like parking and roads that get snagged up by there's too many cars.
Yeah.
These are all kind of things. I mean, I live in Guildford, and there's a town nearby called Godalming, which is a very desirable town.
Very nice.
And it is nice, but every spare bit of land, there's been flats and houses shoehorned into, and the roads are so clogged, all the surgeries are so full of patients. It's a very difficult problem to solve, and we're not going to be able to solve it on this call. But we have suffered successive housing ministers who have never really grasped the real source of the problem. And that's all coming home to roost now.
I mean, I think housing ministers are brilliant. I think that's a fantastic topic. It should be up there with it's obviously not the same as the Home Office or
but it should be a
Treasury,
cabinet post.
but it should be a senior cabinet post. Why? Because Every single person in the UK lives in a house or a flat. They have a home. Every single person. Not everybody pays taxes. Not every person pays, and I think it's fundamentally one of the most important things. And secondly, they need someone who has some experience. I mean, the civil servants that you will meet who sit in DLUC, which is the government body there, they haven't got a clue. I mean, they have not got a clue. And you meet them and you hear the nonsense that they say, and they just don't, it's absolutely ridiculous. And you sit and they just don't, they say they get bodies with advice, but they take no notice and they just do whatever they want to do. And it's really sickening. And the housing minister is something else. It's a disgrace. It's a disgrace. It's shocking.
Well, I think the pendulum has swung much more, in favour of tenants.
Yeah.
And as in all of pendulum motions, it will at some point start to turn back towards landlords if it's been too extreme. And we will see what impact the Renters' Rights Bill has on our sector over the next 2 or 3 years. And it will be very interesting how it all pans out. And, talking of looking forwards, we're here at the end of November 2024.
Yeah.
And the new year will be upon us before we know it.
Certainly will.
Do you feel positive and confident about the London property market in 2025 for both sales and lettings?
Okay, so I'm a half cup full type of person. I am not a massive depressive, and I'm never going to talk things down because I think that is just pointless. If you constantly look at the negative and talk things down, you may as well give up the ghost and go and live in a hut in the desert, because honestly, you just can't think like that. Am I positive? I'm always positive, but right at the moment, I think this year has been a good year because we have seen capital prices. Sales have been okay. It's been very challenging. Our overseas branches have kept up with their last year, which I'm really surprised. We thought we were going to be down with the number of overseas buyers. We've seen a shift towards owner-occupiers as opposed to investors. And I think that will 100% continue into next year. We've seen far more overseas buyers. 9 out of 10 of our overseas buyers, when they reserve, they come here or send someone to have a look at what they're buying. That used to be 30%. Now it's 90, at least 90. And so that's a huge change. I think it's also a huge change. There are more owner-occupiers. And when I say owner-occupiers, it might be for their children's education, and then they turn to be an investor after that. But this is not, we are seeing a genuine shift because of the taxes that has worried people overseas to not look at investment in the same way in the UK. They are still investing, don't get me wrong, but nowhere near in the same volumes. Chinese investors are down through the floor. And people are looking at other markets. If anybody's been to Dubai who's listening, they will be, and they weren't just lying on a beach and they went to a property show. I've never seen a market like it. You think you're missing out. Honestly, 1,300 sales in a day, one tower goes like this. It's absolutely mad.
That sounds like a bubble, Marc.
Yeah, it does. But remember, they'll take money from anywhere. So because of that at some point will change, and then it may collapse. But what I'm saying is the sales market has been challenging because of those factors, other markets, our taxes, but we've still seen some growth this year. We've still seen modicums of growth in London, 3 to 4% on average we've seen. Rental market has been good. It's been very busy, shortage of stock, like you've seen with your own flat. But it is not, we are not running at 10 to 15% increase. That is ridiculous. And you cannot have that because you see 10 to 15% increase, and then you have next year where it falls off a cliff. So that we want to see 3 to 4%, 3 to 5%. And I think we've seen just above that this year. This year, it's been very quiet. Mid November to the end of the year, I'm predicting it's going to be very quiet. But next year, I think we'll see capital growth of around 4 to 5% as interest rate. Hopefully, there's another interest rate cut, which will pull more people into the market. And I think rents will again see 4 to 5% because of this lack of supply issue. And that's a big problem. And I think my view is that we won't see the kind of levels that the government were predicting being built over the next year. And they'll promise it's going to be the next year and the next year because planning has not been relaxed. Developers are not buying, are not building And if the investors market's not there in the same way that it was, as a UK person, I would still recommend property as an investment. I know the taxes are awful, but if you're going to buy it for long term, take a big whacking loan out at the beginning and pay that down over 25 years, it's got to be a good investment. It's forced saving. You've got an asset you can touch and see. They're never going to take it from you, and it's yours forever, and you can give it to your kids if they're lucky enough. And so I think investment's good, but it's not as busy as it was. And so people are, with that in mind, investments in the UK lower, investors from overseas are lower. And if that's the case, how does a developer build a scheme that's not completing for 3 years? They cannot, because they need investors buying the 3-year dream to help fund the project. So what does that mean? They're not going to build something 3 years out. And so then you end up with like the house builders we see, who are not going to build in central London. They're going to build on the outskirts, which is okay, but they're going to see no extra supply in London, in central London, so that moves out. And they build outside where they run on much closer to completion timescales, so timelines. So that's good for owner occupiers, but it means those regeneration schemes where it was an old gasworks, no one's going to want to touch that, because those schemes take huge, whatever everybody thinks, and big developers think, no, they make £1 billion or whatever they make. These schemes eat money. When you're taking out an old gas cylinder, I mean, we're talking millions and millions of pounds, not just to remove it, but then to clean the land and all of that. And that's all dead money before they even start building. So I do think that's a slight concern. Obviously, there are these big build-to-rent companies out there, some of the American, Canadian, other sovereign funds coming in and doing that, or BlackRock and private equity companies who are doing build-to-rent. And they will forecast for the future and build. But I don't know, as a British person, that I want to have 1 or 2 or 3 companies owning 10% of our housing stock. Do we really want that? I don't. I mean, I would hate to think in 10 years' time, if BlackRock own 1 million homes and then they sell it, because they will sell it, to the China Sovereign Fund. I mean, do we want to have a quarter, 10% of our housing owned by China? I don't think so. But maybe people don't care about that anymore. But I think that is a problem we are welling up. But right now, I think that is a slight challenge in the market, the whole lack of investors. And the government have no interests and no impetus to reduce taxes. So if you're out there thinking, I'm going to wait and invest in a year's time when interest rates have come down and they've done something on tax, they will not be. There will not be a change. It's here. You have to live with it. And if you can get a 6-7% yield and you have a 30% deposit, then you still make positive cash flow, and you can still make an investment work. I mean, I still believe in it. I would, and I think anybody that's looking to exit must be mad, because you've already paid all your costs. Don't go realizing your capital gain now. Just take the income and let it be your pension. That's my advice to everybody. Exiting, once you've exited, what are you going to do with the money? You'll run around, have a nice holiday, buy yourself a car, feel flush for a bit, and then the asset's gone. So that would be against my advice.
I totally agree with you, Mark. I have kept the faith with London property since 2004. I still see a lot of positivity for London, and it still is a top ranked city in the world.
100%.
In times of trouble, people often like to park their money in London property because it's a safe haven.
100%.
Rental demand's going to remain high. And if there is a little bit of a correction, and less people, buying, it's going to affect the rental market positively, because more people want to rent. But then there's opportunity for those who could buy at maybe a little bit of a discount. So
100%.
That's what we love about property, isn't it, Mark? Whenever there's a negative, if you choose to see it and you educate yourself and you listen to experts such as yourself, you will see an opportunity and you will take advantage of it. So Thank you so much for joining me on the
Thank you
call
very much.
and for all the much needed catching up about the London property market. And thank you to Benham and Reeves for doing such an amazing and such a professional job about looking after my apartment in London, in Highbury and Islington. Real pleasure working with your team, Marc.
Thank you.
Exceptional service. And what I particularly love about it, just as we close this out, because I think that in the lens of the Renters' Rights Bill, a fully managed service is going to become even more compelling
100%.
and attractive to more landlords, is that with your team, their communication was absolutely impeccable. And I felt that they were completely across every aspect of reletting the property and the
Great.
compliance and this kind of thing. So, yeah, I can see that a fully managed service is with a good, reputable agent who is
Yeah.
compliant to all the necessary requirements, it is going to be a potential answer for some landlords who are going to struggle with the new compliance and getting everything, the
100%.
transition, because it's a massive transition from where we are now. So,
100%.
big thumbs up to Benham and Reeves.
Thank you very much. We love that.
All right, then. Well, we'll catch up with you
Catch
maybe
up
in
soon.
early 2025
Thank you very
and see
much.
if any of your predictions are coming into
Yeah,
fruition.
let's see. We'll
All right,
see.
Marc. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.